Mr. Gio, yes, we can. Such a great honor to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. It's the end of our semester at the university, and I'm not quite finished grading everybody's exams and papers, so busy, but looking forward to that being done.
I can understand. Just before we get started, I would just like to introduce myself to you. My name is NUBiiN, and I'm 22 years old. I work as an English teacher, and about myself, I used to represent my country as well. Like I used to kickboxing and boxing. I used to, you can say I'm a fighter in the ring and in life. So yeah, so I can understand about getting the papers ready and so on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So.
And are you based? Yeah. You're both located in Khartoum right now.
For now, I'm in Cairo.
Okay.
But now I am in Khartoum. Yes.
You're in Khartoum. Okay.
Yeah, so we managed to make it out safely and to take my family as well. Yeah, so it was just such a great honor to meet you right now and speak to you. I heard a lot about you, and I really want to get to know you. So if it's possible, if you can introduce yourself to us.
Sure. Asil, do you want to tell me about yourself first?
Okay. Good evening. Asil Alauddin. I'm a pharmacy student at the University of Science and Technology. Right now, I'm in Khartoum. My study stops because of the war, but everything is okay. Nice to meet you. It's a great honor to have such a great researcher like you. Thank you for this chance and thank you for your time.
You're welcome. So, and do you both identify ethnically as Nubian or Sudanese or both?
Both.
Yes, we identify as Sudanese, Nubian Sudanese, origin of Sudan.
Got it. Yeah, so I am an archaeologist and a museum curator. Right now, I'm based at the University of Michigan, and I have been working on excavations of archaeological sites and exhibits in museums that focus on the Middle East and North Africa for my whole career. Earlier in my career, I worked in Syria, and since 2006, I've been working in Sudan. I came to work when there was in the region of the Fourth Cataract, where the dam was being built before the area was flooded. So I worked there for 3 years. 3 archaeological years. That means we come for a few months or 6 weeks or whatever, and then go home. And then since 2013, I've been working in the area of Karima and Merowe, up in at the sites of El Kuru and Jebel Barkal. Yeah, and so I don't know how much detail you want me to get into, but I'll just mention one thing that in the last 5 years or so, our work has really moved toward working more collaboratively with our Sudanese colleagues and with the Sudanese communities that we live in, which is not how archaeology traditionally has been practiced, but more and more archaeological projects are recognizing that we need to share the benefits of the work that we do with the people who make it possible. And so, and this takes a lot of different forms. So, for example, in El Kuru, we were almost finished building a community heritage center when the war started. And this was going to have, the one space we did finish was an area where school children can come and learn about the archaeological site. And we've been able to continue that even during the war. But other areas were going to have exhibits partly developed by local people that were photographs of their their village and the local environment, and photographs taken by them of their own life. So it was sort of a representation of what it was like to live in El Peru for people who visit. And then there was going to be an archaeological exhibit too. So that's one example. And so this is a center that we then turn over to the community. We continue to help and advise, but we hoped it will. We still hope it will be run by people in the community for the benefit of the community. And we're just beginning a project like that at Jebel Barco. It's more complicated in Karima because it's a bigger community and more different groups and so on. But we're working on that.
It's very interesting, actually. You've been in Sudan since 2006.
Yeah, not every single year, but yeah, that's when I first started.
It's very nice, very interesting. I just wanted to, I want you to share your experiences, and how did you find the Sudanese being in our culture in 2006?
Well, I've loved it. Obviously, I've been there for a long time, and there are many parts of this that are challenging for foreigners to come to Sudan. There were the sanctions and all the problems with getting money into the country and everything like that. But part of what has kept me coming back is just the warm welcome of the people I've worked with, and I think the way that our project has developed to have more collaboration with the local community is a direct reflection of how welcoming the community has been. From that point of view, I've loved all my experiences working with Sudanese people. There have been some challenges, of course. There always are, especially when you're trying to work in this collaborative way with local communities. It means that you sort of become more a part of the community. So whatever tensions there are in the community and whatever struggles and so on, you sometimes become a part of them to some extent.
True.
And an example, a sort of example of this has been the way that gender works particularly in El Peru village, which is, I would say, relatively traditional in its gender relationships. And since I'm the director of the project and I'm a man, it's been difficult for me to have open and conversations with women in the community, and also it's been difficult to get them to participate equally in in everything that we're doing. So
the thing is trying to communicate with women in Sudan, it could be a little bit difficult for a foreigner that comes out of Sudan, because how Sudanese see a man talking to a woman in Sudan it could be like a very complicated thing. Like, what are you doing? Exactly. You're talking to a female now.
Right.
So I can feel like all the hardships and the difficulty that you try to do, and like the difficulties that you faced in this position.
Yeah, we actually have one of the this kind of collaborative way of working has benefits, sort of unexpected benefits that are sort of outside archaeology. And so one of those is that one of our young local colleagues in El Peru village was able to apply to the University of Michigan. He's now here getting a master's degree. And so I've had a chance to talk with him a lot more about this gender issue. Like, why can't we just have women working in this community heritage center, along with the men? And it's just like, he says, you can't push too much, you're not going to change our society. That's not what we're asking you to do. And so, so we tried, and that was an example of an initiative of ours that ran into some tension, let's say.
I can understand. Yeah. Like exactly like you said. Actually, how like gender works and how everything works in Sudan. Our culture, it could be a little bit difficult, according to foreigners or whoever comes from outside of Sudan. So
it's just different. Yeah. I mean, like, I think the same would apply to a Sudanese coming to America.
Okay. Mr. Prophet Geoff, can you talk a little bit about yourself? I have made the research about you, and I was amazed. Can you talk a little bit about yourself? Just, to make our followers know who is going to have the meeting with us.
Sure. Well, so I talked about my archaeological work in Sudan, and I talked about some of the kinds of work that I've done elsewhere. What you mean, like personal, like my family, or what do you want me to tell?
No, just like your work, the researches that you have made, your job, and such things.
Sure. Yeah. So I can talk more about my archaeological research in a narrower way. So one of the so I said that my background was working in Syria. That's ancient Mesopotamia, is what we call it. And there, most of the archaeological work that's been done has been done in settlements where regular people live. So you have evidence from houses, you have evidence of what people ate every day, we have evidence of how they live and that kind of thing. And in the archaeology of Sudan, for a variety of different reasons, the archaeologists have focused on big monumental buildings like temples, and they focused on burials. And this relatively little work has been done in settlements. So when I came to Sudan, that's really what I wanted to do, was to bring Mesopotamian techniques of excavating settlements, but also of analyzing what we find in them. And it's been very hard to find settlements. I went to El Kuru, where we thought we were going to find a settlement based on some notes from a previous excavator, and we didn't really find what we were looking for. We did find a settlement, but it turned out to be medieval Christian period rather than ancient periods we were interested in. So that's one part of my work has been a focus on settlements and how regular people live. And, that's an important part of creating a picture of a society. And, I think we can all relate to the fact that if you tell the story of any place only based on its leader or leaders, that's not the full picture, right? It distorts what you know about a place or what you think about a place. So, another one of my goals has been to put the archaeology and history of Sudan more into the world discussion of great civilizations, and there are complicated reasons why it hasn't really had the same prominence as Egypt, for example. And I'm absolutely convinced that one of those reasons is racism, like structural racism in the field of archaeology. The way that works is that the earlier archaeologists from Europe and America they had a historical narrative that we call the rise of civilization.
So, the rise of civilization.
Okay.
Yeah. So in that story, civilization began in the Middle East and in Egypt, and then it moved to Greece and Rome, and then this is a story that leads to Europe. And so part of what that meant is that they were claiming Egypt as a part of European heritage.
Yes, I hear that from Greece they have a Greek origin, Egyptians.
No, it wasn't that exactly. It was just that the the ideas, the culture, the learning in Egypt fed into the civilization of Greece. I know that there's, Black Athena and all of these arguments about the connections between Egypt and Greece, but I'm talking more at a broad level of this idea of how civilization developed and where it traveled. So this is, you probably you may have encountered the idea that ancient Egyptians were white.
Yes.
I mean, this is, and also the idea that Egypt's not really a part of Africa. Those both come from this rise of civilization story. Okay. Let me just. Sorry. Okay. So one last point now to connect this to Sudan. So for the Europeans, Sudan was not a part of the rise of civilization. So that's a historical story that includes some cultures and some people and excludes others. And so ancient Nubia, ancient Kush were outside that story. They don't have any connection. And that's part of the reason why Kush and Nubia have not had as much attention in international archaeology, international studies of ancient history. It's because they just don't connect in the same way to the heritage of Euro-America. So that's that.
Yes,
so this is all going back to my goal. This is all going back to my goal of trying to put ancient Sudan, ancient Kush, ancient Nubia back onto a world stage of being a part of the history of great civilizations of the world.
Okay, as we are talking about, ancient civilizations, there is an idea that all the people around the world have originated from Africa and Sudan especially. Is that true?
Well, I mean, if you go back to the ancestors of humans, yes, they started. I mean, is that what you're talking about? The origins of humankind, all people. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an idea that's still
there is,
that's still supported.
Yes.
Sorry. That's true. I don't think that Sudan has a special place in that story. I mean, it's one of the Nile Valley would be one of the routes by which human ancestors moved out of Africa and traveled to other parts of the world, populated other parts of the world. But that happened millions of years ago. So long before we can talk about any specific historical culture.
Okay. Since you have discovered Al-Kuru, would like you to talk a little bit about the Nubian history. If you have a little of information about it, it will help us. We are in our YouTube channel are mentioning the Nubian history as a part of our podcast.
Excuse me. I mean, the first place I would start, and I'd be interested in your reaction to this, is what term you use to describe the ancient culture. And I know this has been a big political issue in Sudan, is whether you use the term Nubia or whether you use the term Kush, and I'm trying. I mean, I'm just basing this on the ancient texts, and in the ancient texts, from the time of the Pianki and Taharko and so on, the term that they used for themselves was Kush, no question. Nubia, the Nubian people are first mentioned in texts in the 3rd century BC.
Okay.
So that's pretty late in the whole history of ancient Sudan. of course, they existed before then, but that's just when they, came to the notice of people who were writing texts in Greek in Egypt. And so from that perspective, the ancient culture is Kush, and then the medieval culture is very clearly, Nubian speaking. So this is the Christian culture of the Nubian kingdoms. So I'm curious what you think about that way of talking about the ancient and medieval history.
Muslim, do you have anything to say?
Actually, Mr. Geo, yes, you're actually right between like Sudanese culture. Yes, we are considered as first Kosh and then Nubian. But the origin of most of the Sudanese are Nubian, and then the mixing came along, and but as you actually said, a very interesting point that the ancient history goes back to the Nubia before Egypt, right?
Well, okay, that's complicated. So there is one Greek historian who claimed that Egyptians, who was writing in, I think, the 1st century BC, pretty late in history. He had sources who were in Egypt, and they told him, when he visited Egypt, they told him that Egyptian civilization came from, they didn't call it Nubia, they didn't call it Kush, they called it Ethiopia. But that's the term that they use. But we know that refers to, Meroe and Jebel Barco and so on. It's the culture of Kush.
Because actually, this is a very interesting point. Because when I went to Sudan's pyramids and looked at on the history and where actually which one came first, and then I went to Egypt as well because I'm Nubian, right?
Yeah.
And I really wanted to know who came first and who came second and who's following who. However, Egypt's history and culture took over because of yes, they had the majority of the bigger stories and the bigger pyramids, but and being who is which culture or which history started first, I think it was in Sudan first, right? But between
there was an argument.
But
there are so many ways to answer this. There's so many ways to answer this. All right.
But from Ethiopia, actually, I know the history coming back to or going to Egypt, right? He said it's from Ethiopia, actually. So that was just a little bit new to me.
Yeah, it's confusing. The term Ethiopia, when it's used in Greek texts, doesn't refer to modern Ethiopia. It refers to Kush. That was the term that they used for Kush. Anyway, so there's many ways to answer this question of who came first. I think if you look at the archaeology, so in Egypt, there's a period of time when around 3000 BC, when ancient Egypt was unified for the first time.
Yes.
So before that, this there were some small kingdoms in Egypt, in Upper Egypt, also in the Delta. But anyway, and there was a kingdom in Nubia. This is in Egyptian Nubia. And so those kingdoms were contemporary. They were they were trading with each other, and
That's right. There
and
are
so I think that
relationships between them.
they were developing at the same time. And then even that far back in history, as you say, the Egyptians conquered those Nubians and actually just burned the sites, and they captured all thousands of people and took them to Egypt, and then for many centuries that part of Egyptian Nubia was only had nomads living in it. But there's another answer to this that you might like more, which is if you go even further back, like 5,000 BC. So there was a period of history when the Sahara was green, the desert was green, and there were lakes, and so during that time, people didn't really live in the Nile Valley in Egypt or in Sudan.
Yeah,
that's mostly in what's now the Sahara, and there were lakes in the Sahara. They fished and they whatever, and so the desert started to dry out, and those people who were living in the desert settled in both Egypt and in Nubia. So that's to me the most important answer to this, is that ancient Egypt and ancient Nubia come from the same people. So it's not really it's not so much a question of who's first, but it's a question of really from the very beginning them being very closely connected.
So you're saying like they were connected with each other, and then later on they separated into two different countries.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting though, because when I went to the pyramids there and to check on the history, it's actually because it says there that the pyramids in Sudan, are actually built before the ones in Egypt. But how you actually
that's not true.
Really,
that is not true. If people say, and it is true that there are more pyramids in Sudan than in Egypt, but the pyramids in Sudan were all built later than the big royal pyramids in Egypt. A lot later, hundreds or thousands of years later.
Okay, I get you now. It's very interesting, actually.
Yes, there was a great argument between Sudanese and Egyptian, and that question that Mohsen asked, who came first? Then I think now everything is obvious.
I think
so we don't have to argue anymore. Thank you for listening.
That would be if people just listen to me. Yes, I'm sure that will solve all the arguments.
Yeah. So Kudu, the city, the hidden city.
Yeah.
So one of the good interesting stories that you actually told us about the difficulties that difficulties you faced in while discovering the city was communicating with female Sudanese so you can get them like participate in the work and everything can go smoothly. Is there like any other difficulties that you like found or any other difficulties that you faced in this kind of situation?
Well, I think initially when we first arrived, I think people didn't necessarily trust us. We're foreigners. We're coming to their village. They think we're looking for gold, and that whatever we find, we're going to take away with us. And so, but we were friendly and we talked to people, and we really wanted to explain what we were doing, and so I would say over a few years it became clear that we weren't doing anything like that, and and people started to be, more interested in what we were doing and more collaborative, working together. So, other difficulties, like the U.S. sanctions against Sudan made parts of our work, difficult to bring equipment and how we get money into the country. But the people that we work with, and I'm including like the Sudanese government archaeologists who always work with us and who are good friends of mine now. Always found ways to make our work smooth and also to help us learn about local customs and cultures. So we didn't do too many things that made would be embarrassing for local people. There's always some, there's always some embarrassment. You're coming, you don't know what is expected, and whatever. But I think we didn't do anything terrible, so that was good.
It's actually very interesting.
We have talked about the countries. We'd like to talk a little bit about the city itself. I had made research about it, and they said that it was the first of the 3 royal cemeteries used by the royal Koshi.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so El Kuru is a pyramid cemetery for kings and queens of Kush, and as you're saying, Asil, it was the first of 3 or 4 royal cemeteries used by the Kushites. So after El Kuru, most of the burials moved to Nuri, and then after Nuri, most of the burials moved down to Merowe. But also there were some pyramids built at Jebel Barka, and so the cemetery at El Kuru has the burials of the very early kings leading up to Pianki, who was the first one to conquer Egypt. Yes. And so his tomb is there. It's a very small tomb. But the kings and queens who came after him had more elaborate tombs, and several of them have preserved paintings on the walls, done in an Egyptian style. And this is the period. This is the moment when the Kushites started for the first time to write. Before that time, they didn't write anything. But conquering Egypt gave them access to scribes who could write. And so what they wrote, the language and the script that they wrote in was Egyptian hieroglyphs. Yes. And so the Kushites conquered Egypt. They adopted many aspects of Egyptian royal culture, but they retained also, their own identity and their own culture. So, for example, they were always buried on beds in the cemetery in El Kuru. There's, even though it's dug into the stone, there are 4 holes for the legs of a bed inside the burial chamber. So that must reflect some, and there's a long tradition of that in Sudan, at the earlier site of Kerma, for example, where, people are buried on an ungareb. So that seems to be some, part of their belief about what happens at death and what happens after death, that you need to have a comfortable place to sleep. Yes.
Okay, as an archaeologist, does the expectation, journey, it's really like the movies as we see? You find gold, you find furniture they say that the bird will need it in his other life. It's truly like the movies. Is it true that you find such things?
Well, so at Alcura, we didn't find any gold. No gold. We've been working at Jebel Barkal.
Yes.
We've been digging at Jebel Barkal over the last 5 years or so. And so we found a big area of ancient city. And you know, with workshops and big kind of, it's more of an industrial area of the city, I think. No gold from there. But at the same time, we've been working with our Sudanese colleague Sami El-Amin, who is part of the Sudanese government Department of Antiquities, and we want to remove the dirt that was dug up by earlier excavators. So there's big piles of dirt all over the site, and it makes it difficult to understand what you're looking at and so on. So we started digging in one of these piles of dirt, and we're screening everything. We put it through a small screen to make sure that we get the artifacts. And in that dirt, there's a lot of gold, very very thin gold foil, which was interesting. I mean, it's not a lot. It's not like you have a bag this big or something. But I mean, every day we would find a few pieces of gold. And the reason is that dirt had originally buried royal statues of the kings of Kush, and those statues originally have been covered with gold.
Yes.
So maybe you've seen those big statues of Taharko in the Khartoum Museum. That was a statue that was buried at Jebel Barkal. Originally would have been covered in gold, and so the dirt that was all around them just had all of this gold foil that came off the statues, and so it does sometimes happen that you find gold. That's not why we're there, So from the point of view of knowledge, we already knew these statues were covered with gold. So when we find more gold, it doesn't add anything to what we know about history or anything like that. It definitely keeps the local guys who are screening interested, though. They are paying attention.
Yes, I know. Okay, as you have worked, in Nubian culture, do you have like previous work in Egypt or such expectations work?
I haven't worked in Egypt. I've traveled in Egypt, but I worked in Syria. That's my other main excavation experience.
Okay. Austin, do you have any question?
Yeah, I'm very interested in the new. If you can share about the new places that you're working on right now on Syria, or new cities that you're looking forward to discover.
Well, yeah, I mean, the place that we're working now is in Jebel Barkal, and there we discovered an area of the city that nobody had recognized was a big, had a lot of people living there. And we haven't published very much on that, but there've been a couple of National Geographic documentaries about that have shown some of that work recently. And we're working on publishing right now. But anyway, we found the area of the city using a technique called magnetometry, which is magnetometry. It's like magnets, it measures the magnetic field of things under the ground. And so we walked over this whole area of the site, and it basically gave us very close to a map of what that part of the city looked like. And so now we sort of know what we're looking for, or what we can find in different areas. So we're starting to excavate and get more detail about what all of those areas look like. Where
It's very interesting.
Sorry?
Yeah, I'm listening to you. What you're saying right now is very interesting. That it adds a lot into like what's been missing in our history that the world itself doesn't know. What you're discovering right now, like it adds so much value, and this is what we're looking for actually to our history itself. So we can like the rest of the world can know what is Nuba, what does the word itself mean, and like the aging stuff that we have in Sudan, because like the world is just giving it like they're giving it their back on it. So what you discovered right now, like it's a very interesting, very interesting.
Well, I'm glad you think so. I was gonna add that part of what we're finding as we excavate is the remains of animal bones from what people ate, and the remains of plants that are also a part of the diet. So one of the questions we had was whether they were mainly eating wheat or whether they were mainly eating sorghum. Because further to the south, in the city of Merowe that you visited with all the pyramids, that area in antiquity was primarily a sorghum eating area. And
Till now, they depend on sorghum in their diet.
Right. So we didn't know what it would be like in the area of Jebel Barkal. So anyway, there's a special archaeological technique where you take the dirt that you're excavating and you dump it into water, and the burned seeds float to the top, and then you can scoop the seeds off, and then you can look at them under a microscope and identify them. This is wheat, this is sorghum, whatever. And so we found out that in Jebel Barkal there was almost entirely wheat. And so this is I mean, we're just trying to put together this whole picture. This is partly potentially interesting for understanding the local environment and climate at that time, but also maybe also a kind of a cultural thing, that we think the people from further south, maybe we're a kind of a different cultural group than the people who are living at Jebel Barkal. So maybe they had different traditions of cooking. That would make sense. So anyway, we need to do more analysis and so on, but that's one of the things we're looking at. We're also really interested in what kind of meat they ate. And you might think that because they lived next to the Nile that they ate a lot of fish. It's completely not true. Almost zero fish bones in any of the samples that we've looked at, which is strange, right? I mean, like that's an abundant source of protein, but there seems to have been an idea in antiquity that eating fish was unclean and lower status or something like that. And so in the capital city, they almost the vast majority of the bones were cattle. They were eating a lot of beef.
In our history book in schools, we have learned they depend on fishing and in their diet. That's the first time to know they didn't have it.
It's not true. And I mean, it's there have been just a couple of people who've worked on this to actually document what the diet was, and so we have a few points of data. But for these later periods of push, it's like 85 to 90% of the bones are cattle bones, which is so. Here's another thing that might be interesting to you. So where did they raise all of those cattle? Like enough cattle to feed a whole city?
Yes.
That's not just like a cow under the date tree. That's a whole. You have to have a whole herd of cattle that can move around and graze and so on. So I'm also working on the idea that that this must have been done by somebody like the Bagara, an ancient version of cattle herders who lived not in the Nile Valley itself, but in Kordofan or in the west of Sudan. I mean, they had to be close enough to the Nile that they could, bring cattle to the city. But the climate was also not as dry then as it is now. So the desert was not as far south. So I think it would have been possible to raise cattle further north than you can now. But anyway, we're working on this as an idea of how the different parts of Sudan connected in antiquity.
That's really interesting. I think we should have a second episode for that.
I mean, it's now archaeologists can do amazing things by doing chemical tests on bones, and you can identify to some extent. Well, you can identify which bones are from animals that grew locally, because they drink water and the water has certain chemicals in it, and that gets into their bones, and so you can identify what that looks like locally, and then you can identify which bones come from somewhere else. And so we haven't done that study yet. Maybe it would be better to wait on this episode until we have some actual results to talk about. But anyway, that's also something we'll be working on in the coming year.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, exactly. There's more we can do about this too. Like you can find out from a careful study of the bones how the animals were butchered. Different cultures butcher animals in different ways. They make different cuts and so on. But you can also find out how they were being cooked. Like, for example, if you're roasting meat with a bone in it, the ends of the bones will get burned.
Yes.
So you can see that in the archaeological record. Okay, this is just this kind of thing. Another kind of example of a cooking practice that we sometimes see is where they take the long bones of the cattle and they smash them, and then they would boil that to get the marrow out of the bones, which is also nutritious. And so anyway, I'm hoping we'll be able to get.
Actually, until now we do it actually in Sudan.
Yes, we use it as a hair product. The marrow.
As a hair product. Oh.
Yeah, it's very beneficial.
It's so useful.
Yeah. So anyway, we hope to right now all we can say is, let's say 85% of the bones are cattle, but there's a lot more that you can get from further study of the bones. And I wasn't even thinking of hair care, but anyway, that would be interesting.
Yeah, it's actually I've always wanted to be it's always like catches my attention how you can tell each animal from their bones and how they are like actually getting you can find out what the type of the animal it is and how they actually butcher them. It's very interesting actually. I've always wanted to know how does that actually happen, because it's like for me personally as Muslim, like I can find it very, very surprising. Okay, this animal was butchered this way, and in this certain way of butchering, and the same way that you just mentioned is very interesting. Actually, it adding a lot of knowledge and info. I really appreciate that. I really do.
Yeah,
Okay, there is another question that you said there is a number of things they had like a social relationship between them. You said there were trade and such things. So there is any kind of furniture that we can find here or items or can find him here in Sudan, and also we can find it in Egypt.
Yeah. There's definitely all kinds of connection. I mean, for part of the time period that we're studying, Kush controlled Egypt during the 25th dynasty of Egypt. And so that was one kind of, it was all one empire. And so goods moved back and forth. And then after the Kushites lost control of Egypt, there was other kinds of trade. And then when the Romans later conquered Egypt, that brought more trade with the broader Mediterranean world. So mainly we're just starting to figure out what the different proportions of trade, whatever. But what we can identify most easily is ceramic vessels, pots, big storage jars that would have contained things like olive oil or wine. We know there was a lot of wine that was brought down to these capital cities, and that could be traded just from Egypt. A lot came from Aswan and other parts of Egypt, but then later during the Roman Empire, things came from Italy and Spain and Turkey and all around the Mediterranean. These storage jars with oil or wine or whatever came to Jebel Barkal, and even some like serving dishes, that would be used on a fancy table. Those also were traded. And yeah, I mean, those are the main things I can think of right at the moment. I mean, so the ancient name of Jebel Barkal is Napata. That was the ancient name. And the Romans claimed that they sacked and burned Napata in about 25 BC. There was right when the Romans took over Egypt, they came into contact with the Kushites. The Kushites fought against the Romans in Egypt. And this is when, the Kushite armies were led for some period of time by one of their queens, the Kandake, the famous Kandake.
And that's...
Kandaga, yeah. So anyway, so during those battles, there are texts from the Roman Empire that say they came down to Napata and burned it. So, at some point we might expect to find, Roman coins or, Roman weapons and armor. I mean, there are scholars who say this never actually happened. This was just propaganda by the Romans. It was, fake news. So anyway, this is something we're looking for. That would be a different kind of contact.
Okay, we have talked about all that. Let's move to the traditions and customs. There is any, shared customs and tradition between Sudan and Egypt as Nubians? Is there any tradition that you find here in Sudan and you find the same in Egypt?
Are you asking about archaeology, or are you talking about in ancient times?
Now, archaeology and ancient times. I would like to know the both.
I am not the person to tell you about modern customs. I'm not gonna attempt that. You know a lot more about that than I do. Ancient times. Well, there was this process, as I said, that started where the Kushites started to adopt not all of Egyptian culture, but certain aspects of it. But mostly, what we see is it's the elite. It's the rulers. It's the priests. So they're adopting Egyptian temple architecture. They're adopting hieroglyphic writing. Although later, in the last 600 years of Kush, they invented their own writing system. Which
they invented their own writing system. You mean the Nubian from Sudan?
Yeah, it's called Meroitic.
Egypt.
It's called Meroitic writing.
Meroitic writing.
Yeah, and we we can't read most of the inscriptions because we haven't found a bilingual text that shows us, okay, this means, this in a language that we know, and this means this in Meroitic. So someday we might find one. It's probably out there somewhere.
About the culture, actually, did you when you were there, actually, have you heard the languages that they speak over there, the Nubian languages?
I mean, in El Kuru and Karima, they speak Arabic. So it's an area that very definitely used to be Nubian speaking. I mean, you can tell that because there are Nubian names of places, Panganarti and whatever. There's places that got their name from Nubian speakers. But over the last, 300-400 years, people started to speak Arabic instead. So I actually haven't worked with people who were speaking Nubian. I don't really know any.
So you never tried
in Nubian.
So you never experienced the language before?
No. Unfortunately, I mean, I have other colleagues who work further north in Sudan that definitely work in Nubian speaking areas. So some archaeologists could speak more to that than I can.
It's very nice, actually, how the experience that you have about it. This is how all this history right now that you have that you discovered actually added into it changed a little bit of what we had in our books, actually. A little bit of our perspective about what we had in our books, which is what actually Asila mentioned that
like there is a number of information you have corrected it for us right now. In history books in the school we learn there is an different truth than what you said right now.
Yeah.
History can be changed.
Yeah, slowly, usually.
Slowly.
But yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let me ask you something. Do you mind? Can I ask you a question about sort of contemporary heritage in Sudan?
Yes, no problem.
So Nubians as a group are very vocal about their heritage and their history and their culture. The people I work with are Shagia, and nobody ever talks about them or their history or their culture or their heritage or anything. And I mean, I can make up some stories about why that is, but I'd be curious about your perspective on that sort of Nubians compared to Shagia.
That's actually all right. That's a history itself. That's a history.
Well, tell me. I mean, I'd love to learn.
You see, okay. So the origin of Sudan are Nubians, right? So the Nubians consist of the Nagla and Nuba in the then we have, which is I'm Dungulawi. I'm from Dungu, right? So I'm originally from Nuba, the region of Sudan. And then later on, after the mixing, because Sudan, as you just said, that people used to trade with each other. So a lot of foreigners used to come along into our country, and also Arab as well. So the mixing later on happened because the country was already open for traders to come in and to stay for a couple of months, years, and some of them got married, and new generation came up. So the mixing that we had, it was Nuba and Arab together. So I'm just giving you a little bit of a summarization, right? So
you're referring to traders who came from Arabia.
Yes.
400 years ago. And that they then mixed with Nubian people, and then they became Shagia.
Yeah, because later on, Sudan and Egypt. Sudan and Egypt was one. So if you notice, Sudan and Egypt was one. So if you notice the Nuba in Sudan and the Nuba in Egypt and from Aswan and so on, they all look the same because all of us are one. And later on, we separated. And from that separation, then the mixing came up. We had Shaigia, we had Ja'aliya, and so on. And then let's just keep going on and on. So the differences is that real Nuba, they speak their language, which we call Rotana. So the Rotana people that speak Rotana, their language, which is their non-Arabic speakers. So when they speak Arabic, you find it very funny. So, and they actually don't look like they don't look like the rest of the people from Shawaiga and the Ja'aliya and so on, because they are actually more darker skin. They have a very dark skin. The people from Shawaiga.
Where do they live? The Rotana?
Sorry.
Where do the Rotana live?
The Rotana.
I think it's
maybe I misunderstood.
Rotana is their language, the language that they speak. Yeah.
Where do they live?
They live in a place.
Northern Sudan, right? They are.
North.
Rotana is common between
Shimalia. We call it the Shimalia. So if you take the north all the way to the border of Egypt, most of them speak their own languages.
Right.
Which is Rotana. We call it Rotana. So the Shawaiga and the Ja'aliya, they got mixed more than the pure Nuba. So even though the colors look different, our face features look different, but all of us in the same are Sudanese, which is just different tribes. More tribes got mixed more, and the other tribes they didn't get mixed.
And so as Sudanese Nubians, what do you think about the connection to the Nuba Mountains? Are there Nubian speakers who live in the Nuba Mountains?
Your voice is cutting up. Can you repeat it back again?
Yes. Are there Nubian speakers who live in the Nuba Mountains?
Yes. Is there?
So it's the same group of people?
Yeah, it's just the same thing I said. Like, we have tribes, and in Sudan it just consists of tribes. But if you went to the region, or just Nuba, in the beginning it was just Nuba. All of us were just Nuba, and then Kosh. Kosh was the kingdom itself, right? So later on, the mixing came in, and all of us just got mixed up, and then we got the tribes itself moved to the rest of Sudan. That's how we got really expanded into our country. So from that expansion, we have north, we have south, right? We have Junub and Shimal, right? So if you notice the south, they don't, and the north, they didn't get mixed much. So you can literally tell, okay, this guy is from the north, this guy is from the south. But the rest, they got really mixed. So that's why most of us look, you can say they look Arab more than Nuba.
Yeah.
But we all have the same thing, that we all live in one country and we all Sudanese. Just different tribes. We got separated into different tribes, different names, and different categories.
I think what Mohsen wants to say that we all of us are originated from one tribe, that is Nubian. And then as Mohsen said, we expand. Like me, I am Ja'aliya. Ja'aliya is a tribe that it's mixed between Nubian and Arab. We have like origins in Saudi Arabia, so you can find, like as Mohsen said, dark skins. You can find like lighter skin. You can find people who are really look like Saudi Arabian or those people from Middle East.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
The mixing was
deep. The mixing was deep. Yeah, the mixing was deep. That actually you won't notice this person is a Nubawi until he says, "I'm a Nubawi," or my origin is Nubian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you can find in our family that a shaggy or a jali. There's no big difference between a shaggy and a jali.
They are cousins.
Right.
Yeah, but there is a difference between a Dungulawi and a shaggy and a jali.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's very interesting how later on the history just through the years, the Shaiga, Jaliya, all of us started speaking our different Rutana, as they say. Yeah, but the Shawaiga, they don't speak Rutana. They don't speak their language. Their language is Arabic speakers.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I've learned.
We have a place called Shendi. Like in Shendi is almost like the same as well. This is where the old pyramids next to. It's next to a place called Shendi.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah. So I'm gonna have to go back to my grading soon. I think. Are there other things you need to ask me now?
Actually, this was everything. Actually, this was everything. Thank you very much, Mr. Gio. Actually, we actually learned a lot, and we really appreciate your time. We really do. Again, my name is I was Mr. NUBiiN. Really a pleasure speaking with you, Mr. Gio, and our sister Asid.
Thank you so much for this opportunity and your time. Thank you so much. It's a great honor to us.
Shukran to both of you. I appreciate all of your questions, and I'm also grateful that we can have this conversation in English. I'm embarrassed that we couldn't have it in Arabic because my Arabic's not good enough, but your English is wonderful. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. So really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. You know Arabic, actually?
I mean, when I'm digging, every year I forget because there are 10 months I don't speak any Arabic, and then I go back and I mean,
So if I said هل حاصل شنو اخبارك وصحتك؟ If I said اخبارك وصحتك شنو؟
أخبارك شنو? What's your news?
That's right.
And how's your health? And I mean, they don't say it exactly like that in Okuru. I think when they say they say khabar shunu.
Khabar shunu. Yeah.
Khabar shunu, and it always has to be tamam.
Oh, nice one. Now you're a Sudanese right now.
It doesn't matter if your mother just died. It's tamam.
Tamam. الخبر شنو؟ تمام والله. تمام. Yeah.
Your Arabic is too fancy for me. That's the problem.
Really much appreciate it. Wallahi, shukran lek.
Thank you for your time.
Really appreciate your timing. And this will actually add a lot into our history, and hopefully the world will notice your work and our history. And thank you very much again for your time.
Okay.